Good morning to all of you. My name is Brian Fratsky, and I am a recovering real estate professional. Today we have a wonderful opportunity to listen to a panel of experts on real estate and our commercial real estate and residential market. If you lived in Bend in 2004, 5, or 6, you experienced a boom time. If you were one of the few that made it through Bend in 2009, 10, and 11, a little different market. And here we are again today. We're at the Tower Theater. It's a new venue for the Chamber. I think it's an outstanding opportunity, different format. And as I go through town and I work with my clients, I hear people saying, Brian, the traffic in Bend is crazy. I just went to Phil's Trail. There's a brand new parking lot and there's no parking. Last Friday it took us an hour and a half to get to Mount Bachelor. Does anybody work in Bend? And I let them know, this is a wonderful thing right now, guys, because we can remember when there was plenty of parking at Phil's Trail. The panel of experts that we're going to listen to today make a living in real estate, both in commercial real estate, residential real estate development, and real estate planning. One note, Wendy Atkinson is out with pneumonia, and Dan Hoban is out with, I'm told, influenza A. But in true Bend fashion, what we now have is a more intimate panel of experts that we'll get to listen from. And as you're going through today's presentation, you may ask yourself, where are the 20, 30 graphs and charts? You may not see that today. However, we will be answering questions like, okay, Brian, you just said the market's hot, but I don't see a lot of commercial buildings going up. Talk to me about that. And our panelists will answer that question. We'll speak to the residential sector, the limited supply of homes, and we'll answer questions about how does Bend as a town compare to other similar cities that have had the same type of growth. But before I begin, I want to thank our sponsors. Our gold sponsors today are Hayden Homes, Ben Broadband, and Lazy Boy Furniture Gallery that supplied all of the furniture up here today. So please help me in thanking them. I also want to thank our media sponsors, Combined Communications, Bend Radio Group, The Bulletin, Cascade Business News, and The Hidden Touch. I also wish to thank our row sponsors and each of you for attending a 100% sold-out venue. And as one note, keep your cell phones on, because today you're going to be able to tag into the Bend Chamber and make comments. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Tia Lewis, shareholder with the Central Oregon office of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt, our platinum sponsor for today's event. Tia celebrates her 23rd anniversary as an attorney in Oregon, having graduated cum laude with a certificate of environmental and natural resources law from Lewis and Clark School of Law in 1993. Since her graduation, Tia has practiced law with an expertise in real estate and land use. She's a member of the Oregon State Bar and serves on the education committee of its real estate and land use section, where she is a frequent speaker on land use topics. She's an active member in the Rotary Club of Bend. She's a Paul Harris Fellow and was elected as the Rotarian of the Year in 2014. Will you please help me welcome Tia Lewis?
Good morning. Thank you. If it gets any darker in here, I might not be able to see, so bear with me. I printed my materials, and they're a little too small for me to read. So, welcome and thank you. This is Schwabe's 6th or 7th year, I believe, as the title sponsor of this event, and we're always very honored and pleased to be here and to be able to sponsor this event and work with the Chamber. Before I forget to introduce them, I am, as Brian mentioned I'm a shareholder in the Central Oregon office, and we have two new attorneys in our office. We have Tammy McLeod and Jeff Patterson, both here in the front row. If you guys would just turn around and wave to the crowd. Both of these two attorneys we're very lucky to have. Both of these two attorneys have very successful practices in the Bend market for years, and we just added them to our team at Schwabe. Tammy practices real estate law with a focus on a wide array of real estate matters, litigation, land use, and community association law. And Jeff has an LLM in taxation, and he practices estate planning, business succession, and tax. So we're lucky to have them. As many of you know, Schwabe is a regional firm, and we have offices in Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Salem, and Bend. And within all of those areas, we partner with various organizations to produce presentations very similar to the one here, and I'll tell you that our partnership with the Bend Chamber is second to none in terms of the quality of the materials that they produce and the presentations. We're always very pleased and happy to be a partner with them. And so today is no exception to that. We have a great panel, and we're very happy to be here and hope that you guys will enjoy it. Our moderator today is Damon Runberg. Damon is an economist with the state Oregon Employment Department. Give me just a second. I think I'll be able to read it better on the phone. There we go. Old eyes. So Damon is a state economist with the Oregon Employment Department covering Central Oregon and the Klamath Basin. He calculates monthly employment and unemployment estimates for the area's counties, and he tracks various economic indicators critical to the region's economy. He writes prolifically and regularly gives presentations on the state of the local economy. Damon is a native Oregonian, and he's lived in Bend for the past 5 years. He received his Master's of Public Policy from Oregon State University in Corvallis, where he specialized in economic analysis and natural resource economics. Before that, he received his undergraduate from the University of Gonzaga. So please welcome Damon Runberg.
Thank you. I got one. Yeah. I've got the mic on my face, so I don't have to hold one. That's pretty awesome. If you see anything that looks strange over here, I guess they taped the mic to me. So, and the other thing I learned too from Brian, I guess, is be careful of this area. That I don't want to fall in anyone's laps down here. So, if it looks dangerous, remind me. All right. So, it is my pleasure to be here today. Before I bring the panel up to discuss oh man, that is dangerous. Before I bring the panel up to discuss our forecast and where the real estate market is going, we thought it was important that perhaps I come up and kind of set the stage for us to say, where have we been? What did the previous boom look like? And answer the question, are we booming again? And a lot of people are worried about that a little bit because a boom sounds great, right? But if we learned anything from the last boom, it led to a subsequent bust. So today, are we booming again? Are we seeing deja vu? So I'm going to take us back in time a little bit to 2005. I know it's hard to believe because I look so old, but in 2005, I was a college student. Right? Usually people make fun of me because I'm young. I didn't expect more from that. But in 2005, I really quickly, most of you were real estate agents still back then, so I was just a kid. And I realized very quickly when I went to Gonzaga that college was really expensive, right? And I didn't want to finish with this mountain of student debt. So after a year of school, of accruing a mountain of debt in just 1 year, I realized quickly, I've got to make some money somehow. So I looked around and I said, I need to find something that has, where I have absolutely no skills. They have a flexible work schedule and I can make a lot of money. Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot of industries that can do that. Obviously, that usually is retail or leisure, but you can't really do the whole make a lot of money part. But I found that the construction industry was booming in Spokane at the time, similar to what we saw here in Bend. So I found a job in a commercial construction firm, and the first job project I worked on were the apartments you see behind us there. Those are the Kennedy apartments. Just so happened to be on Gonzaga's campus, so my commute was very short. And I actually worked on this site for 3 years, and for those construction workers out here in the audience or developers, you may say, God, those developers were really bad. That crew was bad. It took 3 years to build this. Actually, the building burned down when we were 90% done, so we built it twice. But anyways, this was a good time, right? This was exciting. There was someone who was 19 years old, was making good wages with no experience. This was exciting. And there was a lot of people in Central Oregon that experienced the same sort of excitement with the industry, whether it was construction or real estate. So if we look back at these good old days, and the period that we're talking about is 2005 through 2007, okay? These are, we could kind of change that. We could say 2004 is when it started, but we'll kind of focus on this 3-year period. Let's just look at some of the trends we saw here in Deschutes County. So the first thing we saw is home prices rose considerably in that 3-year period, up 44%. And most of this was based on simple supply and demand. We had very low supply. Inventories in the beginning of 2005 were down around 2 months, and so we saw a response from the market, and the number of building permits rose, home prices went up. We saw that response really clearly. Another thing that we saw was employment started going up considerably. In just a 3-year period, Deschutes County added 10,000 new jobs, which I'll say that again, 10,000 new jobs. 17% growth in the number of jobs that we had in the community in just a 3-year period. Now, it's important to note that there was a disproportionate share of that growth coming from what I call our housing industry. So that's construction or the financial activities, which in a lot of ways are real estate agents, folks in banking, lending, etc. So those two industries together accounted for over 3,200 of the jobs that we saw added of those 10,000. So they represent about 18% of our economy at the time, these housing-related industries, but they were over a third of our job growth at the time. Hugely disproportionate share coming from this market. Another thing that we saw was GDP was going up, and GDP, I think, is a bit of an antiquated economic measure. I think it's the idea, GDP, for those that don't know what it is, it's gross domestic product. It's supposed to measure the economic output of an economy. I think it does a very good job at actually measuring the economic output of durable goods, housing, things like that. It does a really poor job at measuring things like services in the economy. So I don't love using it, but at the time we were seeing most of the growth coming in GDP due to housing, and so it actually measures it really well. In that 3-year period, gross output increased by $675 million. Considerable growth in that short period of time. Next, for those that were living here, maybe many of you moved here during that time, but population spiked. It was an insane 11% growth in a 3-year period. That might not look like a big number. The bar on the chart's not very big. Communities don't grow by 11% in 3 years. That does not happen. That was 19,000 people moved to Deschutes County between 2005 and 2007. Astronomical growth. Finally, wages went up, and the wage growth, it stinks that these kind of look proportional to one another, but 4% wage growth in 3 years is also pretty intense. At the time, the labor pool was very tight. There was 4.4% was the unemployment rate in the kind of the money period there in 2006. That is well beyond what I would classify as full employment. That's really a labor crisis at that point. When the labor supply becomes really tight and the demand is high, the market responds, wages go up. And that's what we saw during that time period. And then finally, this is the one that might shock most people. In that 3-year period, building permits dropped like a rock, okay? This felt like a good time in the economy still, right? All the way through probably the middle of 2007. Those of you who were in the industry were still people were still getting hired, houses were being built, home prices were still going up, but we went from having 150 building permits a month on average in 2005, and then by the summer of 2006, there was about June of 2006, we saw 160 building permits. By the end of that summer, in September, the number of building permits dropped to 63, and we never went back up from there. In a lot of ways, this kind of foreshadowed the decline in the demand for building that we were experiencing. So it was kind of this, the canary in the coal mine, if you will, something that we could have looked at, I suppose, at the time and said, hey, something's going on here that we should pay attention to. So when I was in college, like I said, I had these ambitions after 3 years of working in the construction industry of moving on in this industry. Had great time, made a lot of money. I had much less student debt that I would have had otherwise. And it's a little weird for a kid who was in a liberal arts school, who was majoring in economics and political science, to say, my ambition is to become a project manager on a construction site, right? That's a little unusual. But that was what I thought was the future for me at the time. And then the crash happened, right? And I wasn't the only one that experienced the crash. There was 160,000 Oregonians who were employed in the construction industry in 2007. 160,000 Oregonians. In just a 3-year period, by 2010, only 60,000 of them were still working in the industry. 2/3 of all construction jobs in Oregon were lost in a 3-year period. So that industry just evaporated. And we've actually found, we've done some work to track what happened to those folks. They haven't come back. The industry is recovering, home prices are up, we'll talk more about that later. But those construction workers, they've never come back. They changed careers and went to different industries. Really, realistically, our last expansion was a real estate-driven expansion. We saw a disproportionate share of our growth coming from this industry. It wasn't diverse, and it affected a lot of parts of our economy. So first and foremost, it affected our population growth. So we were booming at the time. People were drawn here. And most of those people were drawn here because of these particular industries, the housing market. They were finding jobs in the housing market. And also, these same people who were moving here and were working in the industry oftentimes were also buying houses, right? So we were highly leveraged into this one industry. And also, we were seeing spec building at the time. At the time, it didn't seem very risky, but now we've learned our lesson a little bit. We don't see that as much. There were high debt loads, both consumer debt and mortgage debt. And I'll kind of sit on this one for just a second here, because there's a lot of debate out there about the role of debt loads and recession. But one thing's for certain is that there is a very high correlation between high debt loads and seeing recession occur. So at the front end, once you see debt loads start to increase, that actually means spending, right? So the economy thrives initially. You see people buying homes, spending stuff on retail goods, etc. There's this exciting period when you see debt loads start to rise. But then eventually what happens is there's a tipping point. And when those debt loads hit a certain point, then recession occurs. And if you look back at the last 3 or 4 major recessions in the United States, they've all been characterized by high debt loads by American consumers, particularly mortgage debt loads. And so we saw that at the time, that these debt loads had really gotten to a place that we had never seen in America's history. And then finally, there was 2 separate things that happened in tandem during this period. We had a local shock and we had a global shock. So the housing bubble bursting was a local shock. Now, a lot of communities felt this, right? This wasn't exclusive to Bend. If you lived in Spokane at the time, if you lived in Boise, if you lived in Florida, all places across the United States experienced the housing bubble bursting, but its effect was more isolated to certain communities than others. There was also the global shock. So the global financial system crashed in 2008. 2 things happened separately. Global shocks, it sounds weird to say this, but global shocks are a lot better for local communities because it affects everyone the same for the most part. We're all in it together, right? Local shocks can be considerably worse for a local community. The reason being is you can have things what we call a workforce exodus. People say, man, there is no work opportunities in this community because this industry imploded, right? And so they go someplace else. They go to Portland, or they go to Seattle, or they go to San Francisco. There's alternate options out there for areas that weren't affected as significantly, right? So these workforce exoduses can be even worse when you consider the ripple effect of them. So let's say for housing, for instance, we lose all of our construction workers, our real estate industry dries up to some extent. We see a lot of banking jobs lost. Those people leave the community. What do those people provide? They spend their money in the community, right? So that affects retail, other consumer spending that you might have seen. And so it's really hard to dig out of this when you have this workforce exodus. So if we look at we'll just look at a couple of sample metropolitan areas here. All of them were affected pretty significantly during the Great Recession. So on the left there, you'll see some that are pretty familiar to a handful of us, and some of them you might not really be aware of what went on during the recession. We got Boise, we got Deschutes County, we have Riverside, California, which is outside of LA, Medford, which is just our neighbor to the south, obviously, and then you got a couple of the Rust Belt cities there. So if we look at the trends that we saw with their labor force from 2010 to 2016, so once again, all of these metro areas were significantly affected by the Great Recession. They saw huge job losses, huge losses in property values, etc. But this is what happened to the labor force in those communities over the last 6 years. Some of them saw rapid growth in their labor force, and some of them saw rapid declines in their labor force, particularly in the Rust Belt communities. People are leaving there really quickly out of the labor force. And it's funny when you look at what happened, how these communities have recovered since the Great Recession, and it correlates very well with the labor force. Those communities who have been able to have a thriving labor force prevent this workforce exodus have been the ones that were able to recover quicker. And that's what happened in Deschutes County. Once we started adding jobs, we just added them like gangbusters, and we have not stopped ever since. It has been a very significant expansion that we have seen, and it seemed, for those of you who have been here the last 5 years, it flipped on a switch, right? Almost instantly, you look back a year later and you're like, man, something just changed. And part of that is the fact that we have been able to maintain our labor force. And really, we could thank our tourism industry for that. A lot of people like to rag on the tourism industry a little bit. You know, they bring all these tourists here and they drive on our roads, and I can't get a seat at my favorite pub. But in a lot of ways, it's one of our bigger labor force attractors. It's what draws people here initially. They learn about Bend and they move here, and we get smart, intelligent, young workers through it, and it allowed us to dig out of the recession. So, that was before, but what does today look like? Is this deja vu realistic? Do things look today like they did back then? So if we compared home prices today, the last 3 years of growth, so 2013 through the end of 2015, we see that home prices actually rose at a faster rate than they did back then. They're up 46% versus 44%. Now, those real estate agents in the audience will probably remind me really quickly, yeah, but home prices are not as high, and they are not. We haven't reached those peak prices yet for home values, but we're getting pretty close, actually. And I wouldn't be surprised if sometime by the end of the summer, we're actually there when it comes to home prices. Employment levels rose by a faster pace over the last 3 years than we saw during the boom. And that one, I think, surprises a lot of people. I mean, we know that there's been a lot of energy in the economy, but considerable job growth, 18% growth, which is the equivalent of about 12,000 new jobs. And guess what? This time, we're not leveraged in the housing market. Housing today, the housing-related industries account for 18 to 20% of our jobs we have in our economy still. How much of a percent of this job growth have they accounted for? About 20%. So a proportional share to what their size is of the economy. We don't have this thing where, housing-related industries are accounting for over a third of all the job growth that's happening. Our GDP rose by about the same pace. Population is up very rapidly, but not nearly the 11% we saw earlier. But 5% is still quite fast growth to see over a 3-year period. That's a little more realistic than the 11%. Wages are up even faster. For those who saw the press release yesterday, the unemployment rate dropped in Deschutes County to 4.8%, so we're 0.4% off that bottom that we saw in 2006. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? We have to remember, if you're a business out there and the unemployment rate gets down really low, what does that mean? It means the supply of labor is very tight. And it becomes really hard to expand your business if the supply is so low, especially if there's no if the supply isn't the best out there, right? You have to offer higher wages to be competitive in the market, whereas previously during the recession you could offer a lot lower wages to get competitive workers. Here's the difference though. Building permits. We are still adding permits today. We haven't seen this big drop off, right? That thing that would foreshadow this impending collapse. There was never a ramp up like we saw before. We didn't have a 2005 where we averaged 150 building permits a month in Bend. We have just seen a slow and steady increase to building permits. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with those numbers, so we won't sit on them too long. But it's important to note that it's been a much more conservative approach to building that we've seen this time than we saw before. Another thing to note is that consumers are in a much safer place today. So this is what I was talking about earlier. We have both consumer debt up here and we have the mortgage debt. I think you should focus more on the mortgage debt, the red line there. And you'll see the recessions in the gray. Every one of those recessions, over the last 3 recessions over the last 20 years, were connected with, what is that? A ramp up in mortgage debt, right? Particularly the Great Recession over here. And what does today look like? We've still been declining, might be flattening out a little bit, but we're not in a situation right now where we're concerned about consumers' debt loads. And so it's a much different situation today. Oftentimes we look back on these good old days, right? We look back on these good times and we reminisce and we sit on the positive things, right? I honestly think this is kind of a human trait, something that we all have internally. I have a couple examples of this human trait that we all like to sit on the positive memories. But one, for those of you that don't know, I recently had a child. I have an 8-month-old daughter, Evelyn Gray. She's a beautiful little girl. And when she was first born, I had friends come up to me and say, friends and family members, most of them older, most of them with grown kids, and they said, man, this newborn thing is awesome. It is a precious time. All these positive, lovely things, they said, you will miss this stage so much. And so I took them for face value, right? Well, I haven't been separated enough from that newborn stage. 8 months is great, I'll say that, it's awesome. I see the giggles and the laughs and the first words, which were dada, by the way. So I'm 99% sure she knows that that's me. But I'm not separate enough from that. I remember those first 6 weeks, right? That newborn stage is hard. There was a lot of stuff going on there. Sleepless nights, blown out diapers, you know. But she's a joy. We do this with a lot of things, right? We look back on old times with this positive twist, and we forget some of the risk, perhaps, that was out there, or where we were. And today, career earnings are on track. People did not lose ground because of the recession. For those who have kept working from 2005 on, career earnings are where they should be. So we're actually in a better place today when we talk about wages. We have a diversified economy today. I said this earlier. We aren't leveraged into this housing industry in the same way as we were before, right? Today, our professional sector represents a much larger share of our economy. Tourism is actually a bigger share. And once again, you could debate whether or not that's good or bad, but ultimately that's a great recruiting tool for labor force. And our healthcare industry is growing really rapidly. So those have taken up the slack that we saw in our construction industry. Also, the pace of building and development is much slower today, much more conservative. In our panel of experts, we'll discuss that a little bit more detail. And then finally, home price growth is based on pretty solid supply and demand economics. We have a very tight supply out there. It's hard to find a lot of homes, right? And there's a lot of people moving to Central Oregon. 5% growth in the last year in our population alone. Those people need to live somewhere. So there's a high demand for housing. The supply is low. Building is conservative. Home prices are going up. Very solid economics. So that's where we were today. This is what it looks like now. But what about going forward in the future? And for that, that's where we have our panel of experts who are going to come up now, and we're going to hear from them and a little bit about their forecast going forward. You guys want to come up? All right, thank you guys. So we have 4 panelists that were going to join us today. We have Steve Klingman. Steve, you want to raise your hand there? Steve is the president of Hayden Homes. He was appointed as president of Hayden Homes in 2015. Steve oversees all operating and sales activities for the company, and he has served Hayden Homes since moving to Central Oregon in 2000. Next, we have Jay Lyons right here. Jay is the principal broker of Compass Commercial Real Estate Services here in Bend. Since 2011, Jay has sold and leased over 50 million. 50? Okay. Lots of zeros there. 50 million worth of commercial property. Jay is certified commercial investment member as well as a member of the National Association of Realtors and Commercial Investment Division of the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. Then we have John Skidmore over here. John is the assistant city manager for the city of Bend. He has been the manager of operations for the city of Bend since May of 2012. In this role, John oversees the key departments within the city that manages sewer, water, streets, for our cases that we care about here, land use planning, economic and community development. And last but not least, we have Todd Taylor on that end of the couch there, CEO and president of Taylor Northwest. You're probably most familiar with Todd because of his trucks that roll through the street all the time. We know that activity is happening when we see those Taylor Northwest trucks, right? Todd launched Taylor Northwest in 2008 with his wife, Lori. Taylor Northwest employs 135 full-time workers. The company performs construction projects throughout the Northwest. Todd graduated from Bend High in the class of 1980, so he is our longtime local, could provide some good perspective. And he has served on over 25 committees throughout Central Oregon and 5 board of director positions. So, can we welcome our panel? Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask some questions initially, but then at the end, we will have opportunities for you in the audience to ask some questions of them as well. So while we're working through this, just get those questions rolling. We have mics that are on either side when the open Q&A occurs, so be ready for that. You could also probably do a raise your hand and we could repeat the question. So just kind of think about questions that you may have while we go through some of ours. So the first question I have for you guys is we haven't had that large ramp up that I discussed earlier in building permits, in either our residential or commercial side, really. And the fact that there's low inventories and relatively high demand, that seems strange to me that we haven't seen that sort of build up. So what's going on? Is there something constraining new construction? Is there a reason why we haven't seen a build up in permits like we saw during the previous boom?
Well, I can speak to the commercial side a little bit. So, in terms of where rents are currently and where they need to be to justify new construction, there's still a fairly large gap. The projects that you see going on today in Bend, from a commercial perspective, a lot of them were involve land that was purchased during the downturn. So during 2009, 2010. At $5 a square foot, $8 a square foot. You see land listed today, whether it's in the Old Mill District or on the west side or along 3rd Street, and that land's probably closer to $20 or maybe even $30 a square foot. And you can't really make projects pencil at that price with a few outliers. One, you've probably seen the My Place go up in the Old Mill District, the new hotel. Hotels have a different equation that they use, and they can justify higher land prices. If you have national retail tenants like a Starbucks or a Walgreens, they can afford to pay a higher land price because they pay significantly higher rents, upwards of $36, $48 a square foot annually. But from an office project, you can't buy $25 or $30 a square foot land and make it pencil with the rents that are being paid today. As an example, the Crane Shed Commons project that I'm working on in the Old Mill District, dirt's being pushed around right now, that land was purchased for $8 a square foot. And in order to make that deal pencil, we're going to have to get $2.25 a square foot on a triple net basis for that office space. Well, the market right now for Class A office space is probably $1.65, $1.70 for high-end Class A office space. So you can see that gap that needs to be overcome. And we're hopeful and optimistic that it will be due to the low vacancy rates that we're seeing right now and rental rates ticking up as a result. But I think that's part of the reason why you're not seeing much construction these days from a commercial perspective.
I'll just, from the city's perspective, in terms of the permit volume we're seeing on the commercial side, a good 90% of it, and I just had our folks down at CDD pull the numbers, 90% of the commercial activity are tenant improvements. So it's not the new construction, it's folks rehabbing existing space for business expansion or a new business idea.
What about on the residential side? Any insights into that, why we're not seeing the building activity ramp up?
I have no idea. On the residential side, I think the analogy to your 8-month-old daughter. I have a 19-month-old daughter,
oh, congratulations.
yeah, it's still a lot of work, by the way. But for those of us in the industry, we're not that far removed from the past recession. To give you some perspective, just on my comments today, Hayden Homes, we operate in 3 different states. We're in Oregon, Washington, Idaho. We currently have about 60 active communities throughout 35 cities. And when it comes to inventory levels, this is a regional problem. This is a nationwide problem. It's not a specific to Bend issue. Low inventories are across the board. Part of it is the main reason is access to credit. There's been for borrowers. There's been a lot of consolidation in the industry because a lot of the bankers got out of the industry, and few are getting back in on the land acquisition and development side. And so builders have a lot less access to credit, so therefore going out and developing lots, which is very capital intensive and time consuming, it's not available. It's also very risky. And so during the recession, having finished homes for sale was a challenge for builders, but having unused leveraged land on your balance sheet is what caused you to go bankrupt. And so both bankers and builders are really hesitant to get back into that space. It's happening, but it's happening much more conservatively. So the builders out there today that can develop their own land are doing it in very small chunks, just for themselves, in smaller phases. So when you used to see plats getting paved of 50 to 100 lots, you're seeing more of 20 and 30 lot developments, which the time horizons involved in bringing that land to market is longer, but also when you do it in smaller phases, it just takes more time. So that's keeping the availability of inventory down.
So I kind of want to dig into this land cost thing maybe a little bit more. I think that's an important thing we should sit on here. So we keep hearing that the cost of land is slowing new building construction to some extent. So is this true? Are we really nearing a point, and Jay, you touched this a little bit, but are we nearing a point where home prices or lease rates are high enough to allow or justify new building construction to make more economic sense? Are the trends getting to that point where we're going to see those two lines crisscross anytime soon?
Not yet. I think we're getting closer. A couple of things I'd start off with. One of my favorite sayings is from Lonesome Dove, and it says, yesterday was yesterday and today is today. We can't move forward by looking in the rear view mirror all the time. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what happened through this last recession. And I think it's safe to say, if you were playing at all, and that could be owning a home, investing in real estate, in the stock market, we were all touched through that period of time. And we were fortunate to learn some things along the way. But the math is the math. In today's commercial market, it's still difficult to get a return on investment. And you have to set a parameter where you feel comfortable of taking the risk. So if you look at just pure cost, if you just run the numbers, you're going to spend $10 to $12 a foot in permitting costs today through the city of Bend. No disrespect, John. You're going to spend $16 to $18 for architectural fees. You're going to spend $4.50 for your civil engineering cost. You'll have $3 to $5 miscellaneous, and then you have your land cost on top of it. Before you know it, you're in that property $80 a foot before you go vertical. So when you start thinking about returns on investment, set a number. If I want to get a 10% return, 8% return, those are the dilemmas that we currently face. When buildings were bought through the slow time, at $70 a foot, $60 a foot. Today's construction cost is $225 to $250 a foot. It's taken some time to absorb all of that space. So new construction is still competing with some of those buildings that were bought through the slow time. But we're finally getting to a point where we can start to see some of the rates. You see it in the downtown core, where rental rates now, lease rates are up at a point where they make sense. So I think we're a year away, but we're finally working our way through an absorption rate of really, I should say, properties that were bought well through the slower times. And we're getting to a point, but you're not going to go buy a piece of land and build a building, a good building, and see a 12% return, even with the cost of capital today. So it's still really tight. And, but we're starting to see on the graph that we're catching to a point where the $2 a foot isn't alarming to people. A year ago it was, but today I think we're getting closer to where we can have those conversations with tenants.
On the residential side, land costs, to be totally honest with you, is not the factor for us. Reality is during the previous boom, land was trading, residential ground in Bend was trading for in excess of $500,000 an acre. Today it's a third of that. The conditions that created the boom last time was there was a lot of merchant land developers, and there was a lot of land speculation, and banks were doing asset lending. They were doing project-based lending and not looking at global cash flow or contingent liabilities. So today, that merchant developer group is all but eliminated, and those in that space are highly liquid. So they're doing a lot of this development work for cash, which allows there's just not as much risk in that space. But the development costs, from our perspective, are 200% higher than they were during the previous boom. So we're buying the land. The land is not the issue. It's the entitlement timeframes and the cost in order to get bring that land to market is where we're seeing the cost of land being a significant issue for us.
So we'll move on really quick. And so, like I said in my presentation, there was 160,000 construction workers in 2007 in Oregon. And then by 2010, we dropped to 60,000, two-thirds drop in the construction labor force that we had. Is there a construction labor shortage out there today? We keep hearing rumors about that, or perhaps something about there fewer subs, et cetera. And if so, is the cost of labor becoming a key factor that developers have to address when considering development?
Well, I would definitely think there's a shortage in employers or employees currently, but that's not just in construction. I think that's throughout all of the industries in Bend, and whether it's the city looking for new planners across the board. So we're all facing that dilemma. The challenge, though, is we came off of a time when the construction was close to 14.5% of our economy in Bend, which was through those years that Damon described earlier. But today, you know, I think we're hovering around that 7%. So from a risk perspective, I feel a lot more comfortable today on where we sit from a construction employment perspective. But let's not lose perspective that one reason we're seeing cost increases is because the cost of labor is up. So to get good people to come to Bend, and I can use a couple examples, you know, we have an average of 52,000 is what our averages are in our company. So at 52,000, someone that moves to Bend and comes to work with us is probably, if their spouse is working, more than likely they'll look at a place in Bend. If not, we have a third of our employees that live in Bend, a third that live in Redmond, 20% that live in Prineville, and then the other 15% in other areas. But a one-horse pony providing the income in the family is probably not going to live in Bend today. So part of it is, where do they live if they get here? So that's one of the challenges. But on the other side, the people that are coming back to Bend to work in construction are working in other areas where Bend is really quite nice to work in. I hired a project manager that lived in Seattle, was working in Bellevue. A one-way each day, he drove 2 hours. He moved to Crooked River Ranch, he drives 30 minutes, and he's having the best years of his life right now. So it's in perspective, is what Brian said earlier. We're recruiting most of our employment's coming from outside the area, and I'd say it's in the western United States.
Inside our organization, we've grown quite a bit, but we did some things during the depth of the recession to become more efficient. So we brought in a new development software program, and so what we're trying to do is, as we scale our business, trying to do it more efficiently, which requires fewer new hires. In the industry, we don't self-perform any of the activities on our houses, so we subcontract everything out to our trade partners. Labor price, yes, is an issue. It's really availability of labor is the problem. So it almost doesn't matter what you spend if there's nobody to give it to do the work. That's where the challenges come in. And this is again, going back to the regional perspective, this is happening in every one of our markets. And it happens at a little bit different time, but it's been most acute in Bend because Bend got hit harder than any of the other markets in the region. And so therefore, the ramp up is a lot slower. And the demand that's increased is outpacing our trades abilities, excuse me, to staff up. So again, we're so close to the last recession, our trade partners' desires to really get big again and hire a whole bunch of people, it's really small. They're starting to have some more confidence, but their ability to just attract labor is difficult. And then with things going on such as, you know, Facebook and Prineville, those are prevailing wage jobs, and when there's more money to be made, even if it's for the next 6 months or the next year, that's where the labor force is going. So the labor force challenges obviously create challenges for our customers as well. I mean, for Hayden Homes and builders across Central Oregon, the delivery times have been extended. And I know for our realtor partners here in the room, I mean, you've had personal experiences with us on some of those delay challenges related to just not having somebody able to go build a house. So the demand increasing is outpassing our labor force, their ability to ramp up, and so that's going to be a continued problem we see for the next 12 or 18 months.
So we'll switch. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
From a commercial leasing standpoint, we're seeing some of that as well, and a lot of it has to do with setting, you know, clients' expectations appropriately in terms of the amount of time it'll take from the point that the lease is signed to the point that they'll be able to occupy the space if tenant improvements are required. And we try to set their expectations appropriately and under-promise and over-deliver, but we tell them that from the time that you submit an application to the city, and John, you can touch on this, to the time you get a building permit back for the TIs could be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks just from the amount of TI permits that you guys are seeing. And then from that point, it could be another 2 to 3 months depending on the extent of the build out that is required. So we have a lot of prospective tenants, you know, say, oh, well, I'm out ahead of it, you know, 5 months before my lease expires and we're looking to move. And, you know, that's a pretty tight time frame. And a lot of people who aren't leasing spaces on a regular basis don't realize that they're up against the wall, so to speak. It can be done faster, and it can take longer, just depending on the project. But that's, I think, in part because some of these subs are so busy, and the cost of construction, the bids that we're receiving back for these projects, continues to increase as well.
So we'll switch gears and talk more about the UGB, because I think John can kind of give us some insight there. So I don't know about you all, but I keep hearing that the UGB is going to be this knight in shining armor when it expands, the urban growth boundary. It's going to ride in and save the day for land supply in the city of Bend, right? So is this true? And how much of the land squeeze that we're seeing today, how much of that will be alleviated by the expansion of the UGB, and how quickly, perhaps?
And first, Damon, great job on the presentation earlier.
Oh, thank you.
That's fantastic. Yes, it's not the knight in shining armor coming to save the day. We've got about 22,000 acres in our UGB currently. This expansion will likely be roughly on the order of about 10% of that, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 acres. So you're not going to see a flood of supply that's going to help address these affordable housing issues that Todd touched on earlier. It will provide some land, also through this UGB process. Whether or not we like to admit it, we all live in Oregon. Oregon's not in the business of creating sprawling suburbs. They're really in the business of creating more urban cities. So we are going to see what our senior planner, Brian Rankin, calls entitlement supply. So we have 6 opportunity areas within the UGB that, through legislative action on the part of council, is destined to allow higher densities, more multifamily development, more mixed-use development. So the supply of housing that we should see over the next, our planning periods through 2028, we're going to see a flip of the housing types. We're really shooting for about 55% multifamily, and that provides the ability for everything from affordable and workforce housing up to the higher end urban living that a lot of folks enjoy. So the UGB, the land supply isn't necessarily going to change dramatically, but I think the way that we are approaching it is going to provide some land, but opportunities for different types of housing.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd add in that I'm not sure that this period of time has been that bad. You know, the last 3 to 4 years before the UGB is, let's say it's in 2018 that everything gets resolved and is brought in. But what it has forced us to do is we're doing more thoughtful development today. The projects that are being done are well thought out. People are taking the time and the energy and the discipline that goes into it, I would suggest, is better. One of the drawbacks that we seem to kick the can down the road on is that although this land is being brought in, does it have services to the land? So let's use the north end for an example out by Juniper Ridge is, let's get the UGB done by 18. Does it have the capacity for sewer? And the answer is no. So we're just now working, the city is, on the SEI, which is the large sewer trunk line that's coming from the south. So that in sequence, depending on when the land's brought in, there's still a lot of traffic and utility work that has to be done to get that land available for true development. And those are real numbers. So there's a lag time before they're really going to be ready to be developed at that time.
Yeah, I'd say that of the expansion areas that are looking to come in, and there's a big meeting tomorrow afternoon with our UGB steering committee where we'll be discussing the expansion areas. None of them are served by sewer and water. And so it's a heavy, heavy lift to bring in the infrastructure required to serve those areas. So, if I'm a betting person, I'm betting on these opportunity areas to be serviceable in a quicker time frame than most of the expansion areas.
Yeah, from the residential side, we don't believe that the expansion of the UGB is going to really affect or do much for home prices. Like Todd and John both alluded to, bringing the services, and there's developable land inside the UGB now. The services aren't there, and as the UGB line gets drawn, it's that inner circle that's going to trade hands, and then who's going to bring those services? And a lot of times as developers and home builders, we're required to bring the services to our site from long distances, and that's very capital intensive. And in being part of a local improvement district to get reimbursed by future landowners in that area, the time horizons they're really incalculable, so there's no refund expected. And so therefore, taking that risk it's cost prohibitive. And so we don't think UGB expansion is going to have a real significant impact, and then definitely not anything in the near term on house pricing.
So we'll switch gears a little bit and kind of look at who are the people who are buying property today, who are the people who are leasing property. The common joke is that they're all old people, retirees, and they're all Californians, right? So is it the case that they're all Californians and old people that are buying houses today? Are these stereotypes? Is there anything behind these stereotypes, or is it who is it? I have no idea. So from both, I suppose, a commercial side, who are the people leasing these properties, buying these properties, and also a residential side, who do we see are the buyers today?
Well, I can touch on the commercial side, and Bend's a unique market. It's a small town, and it demands a premium to a certain extent because there's limited supply, and there's real estate investors here locally that like to own real estate in their backyard. So a lot of times when we talk to Portland brokers, they don't understand why the cap rates are so compressed here compared to larger metropolitan areas. And I think that has to do with limited supply, and also, certain investors may not want their money in the stock market, so they are willing to take a lower return on real estate. And also, people like to own real estate in their backyards. They like to drive past their properties. And I would say most of the clients that we work with, whether they're buying property here in Bend or they own property and we're leasing spaces for them, live here locally. We have a handful of clients, from Portland or San Francisco, or you get the occasional person that has come up here to vacation and they own a property down in the Bay Area and they want to 1031 exchange into something here locally. But for the most part, it's Bend residents that own these commercial properties, and they're our clients that we're doing the leasing for.
On the residential side, and again, from our perspective, I can't speak to the whole market, but I can talk about who's buying our homes. Across our company, our average price is $253,000, and so we're tracking who that buyer is. It needs a household income of about $54,000 a year, and that'd be two wage earners, one making $20 an hour, the other making minimum wage. Here in Central Oregon, our average price is a bit higher. In Bend, our median price is $318,000. That would require that wage earner to be making $22 an hour and the other person making minimum wage. So when you look at that, that's one trade professional, a firefighter, a teacher. The minimum wage person is somebody in the service industry, which the service-based business here in Bend is pretty high. The good news with where the buyers are coming from is in Bend, 65% of our buyers are from Bend. So they're Bend people buying another house, moving into a new home here in Bend. And 35% are from out of the area, but most of that makes up other Oregon cities. Last year, we only had 20 California buyers out of the 120 homes that we did here in Bend. And 5 of those buyers bought in one specific community that had 9 home sites at an average price of $550,000, between $550,000 and $650,000. And so the price points that we're at in Bend, they're locals that are buying our homes. 80% of our buyers are working here in Bend, and the other 20% are retirees. So that's kind of the makeup. Now, at the upper price points, speculation, just based on the one community we had, there would be more out-of-town buyers at that higher price range. But what we feel great about is the local Bend population can afford to buy a new home here in Bend. And then in Redmond, a third of our buyers in Redmond are from Bend, a third are from Redmond, and then a third are from outside the area, which would comprise mostly other Oregon cities.
So I'd also add that it's a different buyer today. We have more cash buyers today. There's people that are bringing more equity to the game. So the disciplines are different than what we experienced in the last cycle. And that's what I look at all the time is the chart that Damon put up is what's our leverage ratio right now. So, we have great banks in Central Oregon, and they're everybody's doing a better job of checking debt to equity ratios. So when you have the capital, which we see that in a lot of private, whether it's residential or commercial real estate, more people are able to put capital in the game. the leverage ratios at this 90 to 10 ratios, they're gone. I don't know of anybody that's playing in that game at this point, at least from a commercial standpoint. So there's good cash investments going into it. As Jay had indicated too, the investments, kid yourself not, people still want returns. There's some that are buying trophy properties, and that's great, and for whatever reason it's important to them. But at the end of the day, people want a return on their investment. So as long as the cost of capital stays in line, and particularly where our lease rates are, Bend's not a bad place to play. But you've got to be accepted to say, you know what, on a cash-on-cash return, it may be a little less than 10%. If it's straight up and I'm happy with a 7.5% return, and my cost of capital is 5 or under, that still is more appealing to some people than being in the stock market. So if you're getting a 5 to 6, 7, 8% return in the stock market, the land is still, I think, a good place to go if you have the stomach for it.
Yeah, and to add to the comment on the buyer type, 90% of our buyers are buying a primary residence. And so we've got, there's some retirees and then as a second home, and then there's a small fragment of our buyer group that's investors. And contrasting that to the boom, we had somewhere in between 25 to 30% during some specific periods where investors were buying our houses. And so seeing that buyers are here, living in Bend, have a job here in Bend, and it's their primary residence, it feels like it's a lot more stable ground than prior time.
So I'm going to put the heat on you guys a little bit more. So most of what we've been discussing is kind of current situations, what you guys have been seeing in the market today. We're not going to get into your forecast quite yet, but this next question, I think, gets us into a vision of the future, which is, John alluded to the fact that with the UGB process, we're going to be seeing more building going up and less building out. Oregon, as you said, was not in the business of building suburbs. Was that the quote? Yeah. So what does a more urban Bend look like? We are characterized by our single-family home market, our cute downtown, this small town vibe we have. And I think a lot of us have a hard time envisioning what an urban Bend is. So what does that look like as far as in the local market? The types of construction that maybe we'll see, the types of development. Are we seeing changes in consumer demand that we're seeing going forward?
I'll take a stab at it. So moving forward, I think a good example of what we may be seeing more of is the base camp just down here on kind of where Arizona and Colorado come together. I think Tom Cole is a developer, but it's more of an urban flavor. It's a townhome product. It's right downtown. You've got close access to all the downtown amenities. You're right near the river. You have some storage for all your toys, but you don't need the 10,000 square foot lot. So I think from a housing perspective, we're going to be seeing more of that, more the mixed use development that provides retail and office on the first floor or two, and then you'll see housing opportunities on upper stories. Todd, you did the project at, was that 900 Wall, or not 900 Wall, the 919. So I think probably more projects along those lines. And I think what's interesting to me with that is that there's going to be kind of a regrouping of a lot of our local developers. We have a great local development community, and how are they going to transition from the bread and butter of single family lot, single family detached home to an attached product, a multi-use product. Central area is kind of ripe for that. I think that Galveston is an interesting example where you've seen just market forces attracted to that area. I don't think the evolution of Galveston is anywhere near done, and this is without regulatory pressure. It's just the market seeing a very interesting place with a lot of vibrancy and a lot of opportunity. And so to me, it's going to be, I like seeing that type of redevelopment. I think it's going to be cool to see that. It's going to be interesting to see what happens along Century, and what are some other areas that maybe with a little bit of a regulatory and development code encouragement plus market interest, what happens to places like Division Street? What happens to East Greenwood? I think there's just a lot of really cool areas that are a little underdeveloped now that really have a lot of potential.
I agree, and I think it's important to recognize, from at least my perspective, that the past isn't our future. And what I mean by that is it's a different type of development today. I'm more excited about the projects of the next 10 years than I have been in a long time because it's different development. The days that we were able to take large parcels of land and have the sprawling development opportunity, those days are far and few between. So we're forced to look at smaller footprints. You know, we have to work with our planners, our local planners, on how do we start seeing taller buildings? How do we do these infill projects and do them well? That they're pieces of infrastructure, when you look back 50 years, they look great. And thinking about, you know, areas that have those opportunities for investors, you know, where is that? Well, one that's coming up is the Central Area Plan, which is, you know, from the Parkway going to the east, which takes care of all that First Street going down towards Third Street. That's an exciting piece of real estate that's going to happen in the next 15 years. And they're infill projects. How do you commute from that side under or over the Parkway to get back and forth to the downtown core? So it's creative thinking. The south end of Bend is, you know, it's a huge population base. And if you look at the development, you know, 3rd Street used to be 97. That's how all the truck traffic came through. So over time, there's going to be some wonderful opportunities in those areas. And that's what's exciting about working with the city and encouraging new creative planners to get on board. And we as a community really need to step behind those things and be a part of it.
On the residential side, the single-family detached lifestyle is still going to be widely available in Central Oregon, and that's what a lot of people come here for, is the space. It just may not be available or in limited amounts in Bend, and what we'll see is more density, so and more turnkey living, so more homeowners associations maintaining the property and more common space, so placemaking and with parks and amenities with more homes per net or gross acre. And that's the millennial demographic, and that's a bit of the empty nester demographic is an easier, more turnkey lifestyle with less maintenance responsibilities. And that's what we're seeing that those are our two biggest buying segments here in Bend are people in their 30s and people at 60 plus. And so that, I think Bend's ripe for that, the increased densities.
From a commercial development standpoint, I think the mixed-use projects attract kind of the younger generations and are very appealing. I think kind of more creative office space is what we're going to see a lot more of going forward, similar to the project Dino Vendetti and Don Bohofer have on MK, the tech building. You know, open office space with exposed HVAC and concrete floors and dropped, you know, cabling. I think that's really attractive, and also having those amenities close by with Stackhouse Coffee being there. I think that's what kind of the future of office space is. I think we're seeing more density within the office space. The average square foot per employee used to be about 250 square feet. Now it's closer to 200 square feet. So more employees are packing into less space. And I think you've seen that a little bit in some of the office parks we have where parking is starting to be a little bit congested. But I think people like to be able to walk out their office and walk to the coffee shop or walk to the restaurant. I think that's what's attractive to a lot of the tenants downtown. They're willing to overlook the fact that maybe they have to park a block away in the parking garage, but they have all of those restaurants and amenities right outside their door. I know that's appealing to a lot of the tenants that I've worked with downtown.
And one more point on that. Last I checked, Bend was the 7th fastest growing metropolitan statistical area in the country. So just by the volume of folks coming to town, you're going to see more congestion, more traffic issues, more parking, which is a lot of the feedback I get from folks. And at a certain point in time, you can't build your way out of congestion. And so with this mixed use development type that is really encouraged, and actually I brought our new Chapter 11 of our comprehensive plan, our growth management strategy. I mean, this really summarizes Bend's evolution from a town to a city. And with this mixed-use development type, if you have your amenities in close proximity, if you have your coffee shop, if you can walk to work, the idea is that you're programming your land uses to reduce the impacts on your transportation infrastructure. Detached single-family residential housing doesn't really do a fantastic job of that. But there are development types and strategies and uses that can reduce that impact. And it's not only by having your amenities close by, perhaps the uses start structuring their time so that not everybody needs to be at the same roundabout at 7:45 in the morning and 5:15 in the afternoon. So to me, that's another exciting component of more urban development. You kind of have some more options to help reduce some of the tension on your existing infrastructure.
So we want to make sure that you all have your opportunity to ask questions of the panel, but before we get there, we're gonna have you guys wade into the murky water of a forecast. It is a forecast breakfast, right? So we have to go there. I had an advisor of mine once tell me that if you never make a projection, you never have to be wrong. So I'm going to exclude myself from this one. I'm going to let our panelists here discuss what they think the future of Bend's real estate market looks like. So as I said earlier today, our foundation is very solid. We're in a good place. Our economy is thriving. Diversifying, our community is growing. Building is occurring at a more modest pace. So what does the real estate forecast look like? And maybe our horizon, let's look 5-10 years. You know, I think it's unrealistic for us to make any sort of projections. Hey, what does Bend look like 40 years from now? You know, it's just, who knows? But 5 to 10 years, kind of the short-term window here. What do you guys see happening?
I'm going to go 2 years because I'm not very good at 5 to 10. So, so just thinking about where we are today, I'm very optimistic about in the next 24 months, and let's suggest up to 5 years. But that's based on some discipline staying in place. You know, our debt to equity ratios, good lending. You know, the banks are doing a marvelous job with the consolidation that took place in the lending side, even though it was painful. We have good banks, and they're doing their homework today. So they're helping us from getting into too much trouble. So those disciplines need to continue to be at the forefront of all development that takes place in Bend. We need to encourage, like I said, good planning. And with that being said, the central area, the areas I described earlier, I think are wonderful opportunities for growth. They have services to them today. They're not going to be in a spot where they don't have water and sewer, so you've got services to be able to develop in some of these areas. We also, you know, we're attracting great people to come here. But as important, we need to take care of the businesses that are here, because these businesses have been a big part of our fabric and they're growing. So we need to make sure that we have space for them. And that's going to be a big part of our economy moving forward in the next 5 years. Businesses are doing well here. It's not all lumber-based anymore. So whether it's IT, whether it's medical, whether it's education, you know, pick a variety of different areas. We need to make sure that we can support those companies here, and I think the city is working hard to do that. So I believe that we have as good of opportunity in the next 2 to 5 years, based on our disciplines, to really make a difference in how the city of Bend is shaped and how it looks. And I think it's, from a capitalist perspective, I think there's some good opportunities to see some good returns.
On the residential side, there's not a home builder in the room here that has any idea what's going to happen in 5 years, let alone 10. And I'm the residential expert home builder here on the panel, and I'm about to make an interest rate forecast. So feel free not to write it down. In the short run, we believe real estate prices, you know, residential home price increases. There's going to be, we think, another 10% over the next 12 to 18 months. Also, if you were to talk to a banker in the fall, they would tell you there's a guaranteed 100-point basis interest rate rise, 25 basis points a quarter. You talk to them in January, February, even here in March, no chance there's going to be an interest rate increase. But we believe there's going to be, you know, a minimum of 50, potentially 75 point increase in the base rate, and that's going to settle out in interest rates. What we saw in interest rates for the 30-year fixed mortgages, the rate increase got baked in before the Fed moved the rate, and then it's actually come down. And so near term, I think rates are going to remain historically low, and I think that it's a really good environment. Beyond that, there's definitely going to be another pullback. When that is, my crystal ball hasn't told me yet. But long-term, Bend we're bullish on Central Oregon. I think that all of you sitting here in the room know what we just went through, and you know where we are now. In Bend, we're strong people. We're surviving, and it's the quality of life and desirability component. People are going to want to be here. So long-term, I think Bend's a great investment.
I'm really hot on Burns right now, and I would rush out and buy a lot of property out there.
Especially on the commercial side, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely. In all seriousness, I mean, I just would reiterate kind of what Steve said. I think there'll be a pullback at some point. There definitely will be. But Bend is an attractive town and a resilient community, and I think we have a lot going for us that other communities don't of our size. I think in the near future, the next 18 to 24 months, you're going to see lease rates continue to climb. Vacancy rates have dropped from north of 20% during the downtimes to now office is below 6%, industrial is below 6%, retail is right there as well. So you can see how there's very limited supply, and as there continues to be demand, the rates only have one way to go. And with very little new speculative construction coming online in the next 12 to 18 months, I think it'll be interesting to see where rates go. Landlords used to have a really hard time, and it was very much a tenant market a few years ago, and now those concessions have gone by the wayside, and you're not seeing the free rent or the unlimited TIs if landlords could even afford it a few years ago. It's very much a landlord's market these days, and I think as landlords have one or two spaces available compared to maybe 5 or 6 that they had previously, they're going to remember that they gave those concessions a few years ago, and now it's their time in the sun. So I would expect to see that for sure. The low cap rates from investment properties, I think it's very dependent on where interest rates go. If you see a big uptick in interest rates, cap rates usually have a direct correlation and would go up as well because it reduces people's buying power to a certain extent. But again, there's limited supply and not much being built, and people want to own property in Bend. So I think we'll continue to see a high investor demand as well.
From the city side, I'd say that some of this might not be all that profound, but first of all, we're going to see more people. Bend's always been a very desirable place to live. From 1990 to 2010, Bend grew by 8.5 people per day, every day, weekends, holidays. So even during the downturn, we were still growing by about 1 person per day. So, the faucet was never really turned off. We're anticipating about growing to about 120,000 folks by 2028. In my 15 years here in and around development and land use planning, I haven't seen a population forecast that hasn't been outpaced by on-the-ground results. So there's going to be more folks here. With that, I think there's going to be more vibrancy in different areas. The Galveston area really just fascinates me, seeing it go from a pretty sleepy little commercial area to something that some folks might even consider a little bit bonkers at times. But there's a lot of demand for that type of development and that type of activity. So I guess with the positive, there's also the negative of folks having to adjust to a different type of development and different activities. So 5 years from now, these vibrant areas aren't going to be less vibrant. They're going to be more popular. And so there's kind of a saying that I heard from one of the county planners. He said, compatibility isn't a synonym for changeless. And so we're all going to have to kind of adjust and try to, commingle with these changing effects of these very popular areas. And I think that's, from what our council is seeing, there's a lot of pressure from folks having a difficult time making that adjustment. So what do we do as a community to help work through that? So I think these livability issues, even though livability isn't really a real term, it's something we're going to have to figure out moving forward as a community. We will be more urban. As I mentioned, a lot of the supply that's coming from the UGB is the entitlement supply. So we're going to see at a certain point in time when those two axes cross one another, we will see more urban style development. And then does this lead to more opportunity, more diversification? I think it's great that we've seen a more diversified portfolio in terms of our economic opportunities here. as a fast-growing community with folks coming who are job seekers as well as job providers. Are there additional opportunities for Central Oregonians to live and work in Bend? So more change. Nothing is constant but change, but I'm optimistic about it, but there's going to be some growing pains and a little bit of adjustment on everybody's part.
Buckle up and get on board, eh? All right, so we have a ton of time, I think, that we set aside, so that, because this is the fun part where you all get to interact with the panel, ask any of us. I suppose I could answer questions too if you have something specific about the economy. It does have to do with commercial development. Get me out of there. But we have 2 mics, I believe, right, that are up here on either side. You could come up, or if you're somewhere in the middle, you could raise your hand and they'll pass a mic down, or you might even be able to shout the question out and we could repeat it for you if you don't want to have to try to squeeze out of a middle aisle. So with that, are there any questions from the audience for the panel?
Test,
Oh, there we go.
test.
Sorry about that. Concerning the private sector, you had mentioned that the infrastructure, relative, primarily the sewer, that the private sector is really not, it doesn't make sense for them to invest in that program. Does the city have any plans to move something there, do something there?
And so essentially you're asking, what's the plan to expand sewer throughout the city? Is that it? Okay. So we have all sorts of plans. We have the Southeast Interceptor that's currently under construction. I think we have about $80 million worth of infrastructure projects going on currently. The Southeast Interceptor is going to swing in the southeast area of town, eventually making it to 27th and heading north. A recent adjustment was at moving north of Neff, I want to say. It would swing out to Ward Road, I believe, is the anticipated change. But yeah, we have a lot of undeveloped property within the city that can't be served currently, and projects like the Southeast Interceptor are really geared towards providing that capacity. Some of the challenges we see, though, are areas like Kings Forest that are all on septic systems that are aging, about a 30-year lifespan for a typical septic system. We have a whole bunch of 30-year-old homes on 30-year-old septic systems that are nearing the end of their useful life. What we're trying to do is, how do we, now that we have the backbones of the system planned and we actually have rate adjustments to fund the construction, what do we do to get those smaller lines to serve existing areas that are on septics? Because that's a very disruptive process. It's very expensive. There are state mandates about it. And I believe in 2017, the way that we had rates set through the Sewer Infrastructure Advisory Group, which was a 2-year project we did with a number of members of the community, probably a lot of folks in here, to help plan out our sewer infrastructure. We're going to start setting aside about $1 million a year to start planning for these unserved septic served areas within the city, so that we can actually serve those, and that will provide some capacity for land development as well.
So, and it's much more than sewer. You know, we have the most beautiful parks in Central Oregon, but the roads are so crappy you can't get to them. So when you think about where our priorities have been, we need to think about where we start investing capital. So our city is, you know, they have a great fire and police. We have a wonderful sheriff's department. We have a wonderful education system. We have great parks. We have the best water, for goodness sakes, compared to, look at these poor communities like Flint. We are set from an environmental standpoint when it comes to a quality of life. But our roads are in disrepair. So we're going to have to figure out what we do with that as a community. And more than likely, it'll be a bond. The gas tax, and I don't want to talk on the gas tax, but I would suggest that we have to look at some alternative funding to get our streets in place. For our kids, for education, for police and fire, and that's a big ticket item. There's $100 million plus that'll be spent there. And while the cost of capital is down, we should look at a bond, and we should support it, and figure out the best way that we can work through it. So that's a big part of growth. is that, you know, we have to support, for companies to be in Central Oregon or just Oregon in general, we pay an above average tax to be here. We have one of the highest property taxes. We also pay a personal property tax on top of that. That's why the data centers are where they are today, because they were able to abate that personal property tax. But most of us all pay significantly high property taxes and personal property taxes, and then income tax on top of it. We're paying a premium to be in Oregon. So with that, we should expect to have the quality that we have. And part of that is to get our infrastructure in place. And we've got a good 5 years to 10 years, I'd say 5 to 7 years of truly working on infrastructure projects to get it back to where I think we can all be proud of.
So I've heard numbers on the UGB land being shovel ready for residential somewhere around 2020, 2021. I don't know if that's accurate. But what I was wondering, has anyone done an inventory of residential land on the run rate based upon, you know, how quick we're developing now? Do we run out of land before we get that new land coming in?
And I'm sorry, where did that question come from? Can you raise your hand? Oh, there we go, thanks. You know, we were tracking, at one point in time, we had 2,500 developed lots, right as everything went off the cliff. We have eaten through that capacity at a pretty rapid pace. We're seeing about, I think last year we had 1,000 single-family residential permits. The year before, about 800. So before that, I think it was around 600. So we're ramping up. Our friends at COBA tell us that a nice healthy number is somewhere between 800 and 1,000 permits being issued per year. I think we've done a pretty good job of absorbing those paper lots that were created prior to the crash. Where the capacity exists in the city moving forward is really that southeast area. I think we've got about 1,000 acres of undeveloped land that is currently unserved. And so with the backbone of the Southeast Interceptor moving through there, working with developers and property owners to pull the smaller infrastructure in to serve what will be some single family, some mixed use, some employment areas. I don't recall off the top of my head what that particular area has in terms of capacity, but it's a pretty large number. But with anything, yeah, you're always kind of playing the supply versus demand game, and the UGB will provide 10% more land. How it's developed is going to be a little bit different, but there's a little bit of relief there. And the opportunity areas will provide that entitlement supply. I don't think we're in fear of running out of developable land in the near future, but you know, depending on how the market moves, I think we should be all right. But there's always that risk that we do find ourselves in an area where there's a deficit of supply.
I've got a question about parking when we're talking about the Galveston area, and I agree with you, Jay, that it is an exciting spot in Bend. But I know that there's a lot of residents that are concerned about all the parking getting pushed down into the residential areas, and now we're talking about shoving a lot more people in a small space, and how do you address the parking?
Well, let me address something quick before that. So most of us will get parking tickets at 10 o'clock, right? So from a parking perspective, we'll get you out of here so you don't get parking tickets, but that's just a separate parking issue. But anyway, sorry.
Thank you, Damon. So I was going to play the pointy-headed bureaucrat
sorry.
and remind everybody of that,
you,
but
yeah.
thanks for taking that on. So parking is one of these top livability issues, and frankly, Bend has a very suburban development code. I know of projects, I worked on one before the crash, that you were designing buildings based on your parking requirements. That's a little bit backwards. And so what we will see is, moving forward, urban development codes don't require as much parking. You're really planning on this mix of uses where you can walk to get to places, where you can bike. It'd be fantastic if we can figure out as a community how to get a nice serviceable transit system to help us move folks as well, and I think we're making great strides there, but parking is going to be an issue, and I think as a community, we all need to adjust. you're not guaranteed your spot in front of Deschutes Brewery at Friday at 5:30. It's not going to happen. So start thinking about it. Hop on a bike, but it's really, that's a very emotional issue. It's an issue where, in those areas that are vibrant and getting more vibrant, it's going to be keenly felt by those residents. I think a lot of Hawthorne Boulevard in Portland, fantastic place, a lot of cool things to do. Real estate values have just shot through the roof. It's a really great place to spend some time, but if you live there, you're probably not going to have the space in front of your house open at all times of the day, especially during the evening. And so we're evolving to an urban community. We have different areas that are going to be more urban than others, and our suburban mindset needs to change accordingly.
Yeah, I guess I would argue the fact that we all have our modes of transportation, and not everybody rides a bike and not everybody drives a Prius. So there are areas where we have needs for bigger vehicles to get to and from, and the parking in the downtown core is going to be challenged. It is what it is. So when we think about how parking's been done in the past, and use the hospital for an example. If you go to visit somebody at the hospital, you're typically going to park 500 yards away, sometimes farther than that, to get in to visit somebody. So we have to start looking at what are we doing. We're probably going to look at structures. Some places are going to require parking structures. And it's a different way of thinking than we have in the past. Because the codes on a commercial building today, you're 3 per 1,000. If it's a medical building, you're trying to get closer to that 4 to 5, which is pushing right up against the code. I mean, you can't get to a 5. So it makes it difficult to really park the need of that specific use. So we're challenged with that. So again, it's going to look at what type of parking, what type of structures are going to be built, what modes of transportation, public transportation, the bus systems, whatever it may be. But parking will definitely be an issue from my perspective moving forward. So we better get used to it.
And we are kicking off at the city a parking study of downtown that will move out towards Galveston, Century, and out towards OSU, which is another exciting thing about our future in the next 5 years, I think. And if Carolyn Egan's still out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but our initial studies show that downtown we have between private and public parking spaces somewhere around 5,000 spaces. Carolyn, let me know if I got that right or wrong. She might have split. So it's in that vicinity, and so it's just a matter of how do you use it, what's the timing of it, how do you do shared parking. It might be that we have plenty of parking downtown, we're just not using it in the right manner.
Good morning. Jacob Fade with Morgan Stanley. Thank you, everybody, for being up here today. My question has to do with transportation, livability, quality of life. Now that we've had a few transportation projects, thinking particularly about Reed Market Road, in which I watched a line of traffic from the railroad tracks all the way to 27th the other day. No exits heading south on 97 between Powers and Knott. Todd, you spoke about the creativity and development. What kind of work is going on right now with the city, with land developers, transportation, to make sure that some of these corridors have greater access so that it's a little bit better for people to get around and improves the quality of life for those who are commuting?
Well, that's all part of the planning process when you go through your development plan and your civil work when you go to the city and talk about whatever specific project you're doing. I think one of the areas that is going to be really important moving forward is what is a sustainable type of construction approach? When you think about the first roundabouts, and we were part of those, is that the standard today? Do we have room to enhance some of these and make a wider radius in the areas that we have high traffic volumes, particularly on some of the arterials? So we're challenged with these bottleneck areas. What type of construction? Reed Market was concrete. Concrete typically has a 50 to 70-year life. And when we did the downtown Redmond project, that road was there for 70 years. So asphalt in this area doesn't have, you get to that 9 to 10 years, you're starting to see cracking. I mean, there's all different, depends on what side of the business you sit on. Each supplier will argue it one way or the other. We've been in both. But I think we have to look at different types of construction, more sustainable. So concrete roadways, the areas we can in arterials. making sure our widths are right, that they're pedestrian friendly. Reed Market's a great example of that. So we are challenged with, a lot of the right-of-ways are already set. So it's working within those right-of-ways that we currently have and trying to figure out the best way to move people from A to Z. The parkway's being used. You use that today. As you know, I didn't ever use the parkway. Today, when I go to the south end of Bend, and I'm on the west side, I get on the parkway as quick as I can. So I think that we're using some of those different modes at this point, but definitely some thoughtfulness has to be put into place on our road systems.
Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm just going to tag on to that same question in that I appreciate the pressure to increase the density in that, but I was wondering if the city or the developers have some plan as far as addressing a comprehensive traffic plan for the city. It seems that we have somewhat of a love affair with roundabouts and median strips, which is great, but no two roundabouts are the same as far as the traffic flow when you approach them. And the median strips, as we start to occlude our collector arterials, makes it virtually impossible for emergency vehicles, emergency response vehicles to get an ambulance or fire truck or something down those lanes. So as we increase our density, is there a plan to offset that by creating collector arterials that would be able to at least move the supplies and basic traffic that needs to move across our town?
So we do have a backbone of collectors and arterials throughout the community, and at a certain point in time, any system has to operate with a level of congestion. And I think we're getting to the point where folks are finally noticing, boy, there's actually some congestion here, and our streets continue to operate, although if you're used to never seeing somebody in front of you and you're able to get out of a certain intersection within 10 seconds, if that increases now to 45 seconds, it's a big adjustment. So I think from that standpoint, there's this perception of failure, which might not really be an engineering failure. Things are still moving. But as Todd just referenced, yeah, if you need to get through town, possibly the best thing to do would be to get to one of these higher order streets in as quick as time as possible, because theoretically that should move you through quicker. But as the 7th fastest growing MSA in the country, more people are coming and they typically don't leave their cars behind. So there's just more people on the road, which increases congestion. Now from the commercial side of things, if you're heading down Century Drive and you're a property owner on Century Drive, you're probably pretty excited to have some congestion in front of your building that's slowing down, and folks are looking to see what amenities you provide, what restaurants are open, and those types of things. So there's a bit of a trade-off. And planning for transportation is difficult. The southeast area was referenced. We don't have a block and grid system, which is typically the more efficient way to move traffic through. We have old suburban 70s styles development with cul-de-sacs, and there's not that connectivity that we need. The Murphy Road overpass that will get out to 15th, that's sorely needed. That's not an improvement we can stick on the back of a development or developer. That is really more of a capital improvement project, community-wide improvement that we need to figure out the funding for. So there's definitely challenges with moving traffic through, but I also think there's kind of this perception that we're all geared towards a lighter flow of traffic in Bend, and that's just not going to be the future. We're going to see more congestion, more folks, and the backbones that we have will move them through. It just won't be at the quick pace some of us has become accustomed to. No, we have a transportation system plan. So again, we do have this comprehensive plan. It's the transportation system plan, where we do have the backbones. Really, it's kind of the higher level arterials, collectors that are ringing and crisscrossing through the city. We work very closely with our fire department, fire marshal, police services. We're not building roads that preclude emergency service response. We haven't seen any issues, and I'm not aware of any issues where there's been congestion that's precluded that ability. I do think there's that perception that perhaps that's more challenging for emergency services, but it is a design standard that we work very closely with engineers and emergency response providers to make sure that we do have the ability for quick response times, adequate response times that aren't going to be perhaps challenged by the infrastructure we just built.
Hi, Tariq V. Bolkin, HR at Ben Research. I just have a couple comments. Maybe you guys can comment on this as well. As an employer, we're growing really fast. We cannot find housing for our new employees. We move about 60 to 70% of our new hires come from out of the area, and it's killing us right now. They want to move to Bend, they want to live here. They look at the housing prices, if they can find a house, and they're just not, there's no availability for them right now. So that's a big concern as an employer, and I'm sure there's other employers out there that are facing this concern as well. Another observation I have is that I'm really for the infill in the city. I see all these lots around town that are available, can be used. There's a lot of folks in existing residents though that don't like that, and it would be nice to educate them so that they could see why it's necessary. I think the big concerns is that it's going to cause a strain on traffic. It's going to cause a strain on the infrastructure, so that definitely needs to catch up. But there's a lot of usable land, and I like the idea of the infilling, but we need to educate our citizens on why that's necessary and get these projects moving forward.
Well, I'll say, Trevor, you're not the only one that said that before, by far. I mean, it's with the labor supply becoming so tight as it is today. A lot of the new employees that people are hiring from, the pool that they're getting is from outside the area, and obviously the next thing that comes from that is, well, if they're coming from outside the area, where do they live, right? So this is a common issue we keep hearing over and over again. We actually have a survey where we check vacancies that exist out there and ask a lot of questions about those vacancies in Central Oregon. And being able to find labor locally is the top one. Number two is close behind is where do they go? So I can't address any of the solutions to that, but it's not something unique to Bend Research. I do have one anecdotal thing, and I don't like to say anecdotes much because it doesn't meet the data, but I have a friend who works for Bend Research, and in his neighborhood in the last year, 4 neighbors in 1 block radius have all been new Bend Research people. So evidently you're infilling for us, Bend Research.
You had that great slide that kind of showed the different career choices and the average sales price of a home.
Can we go to the slideshow? Is that back there, guys? This one? Yeah. So here, I mean, this is a helpful slide, I think, to kind of show if you're going to buy the median house in Bend, what you have to make. And obviously, this is a single family or single income here for each of these occupations, but these are what these different occupations actually make here in Central Oregon. I estimated those. So you can see there that that price point's up to $65,000, $68,000, depending on if you put 20% down or not. But it's a real challenge for certain occupations that we think of as professional occupations to find and buy housing on just one income here in Bend.
I can hit on the community education piece about an urbanizing area. Working with the community can be difficult to get the word out sometimes. We have had this UGB process, which had over 60 volunteers in the community sit on various task forces for 2+ years now. But getting the word out about the realities of living in Bend and the realities of urbanization isn't always that easy. For instance, this past winter, our streets director, David Abbas, got a call from somebody who was complaining about the snow on the streets. He had just moved here 3 months ago. He didn't realize that it snowed in Bend. So, there's a lot of just kind of setting the expectation and the reality of what it's like to live in the Cascade Mountains, 30 miles from the crest. So it's there's also a lot of people coming here who don't realize we do live in Oregon. And again, Oregon is not really looking to have these sprawling suburbs. They're looking to create compact areas for a variety of reasons. I'm a recovering urban planner myself, so I kind of have a love-hate relationship with their land use system, but it does create some pretty cool development, but it creates issues of compatibility with it. And so we can always do better. Again, if you or any of your friends want to see where we're going, chapter 11 of our soon-to-be printed comp plan really kind of lays that out. So we can always do a better job of explaining to folks what the long-term plan is and how urbanization will work in Bend.
Any more questions?
Hi, good morning. Derek Bickle with Everbank Home Lending. First of all, thank you everyone for your time and for insights this morning. We have some exciting projects coming in. My question is with the OSU campus. On the commercial side, what sort of developments would you anticipate we'll see in the area? And then on the residential side, how do you feel it would impact the neighboring residential markets, either positive or negative?
From the commercial side, it's a little hard to say because we're not seeing anything come out of the ground immediately or any proposed new developments. I think that area, for the most part, is pretty well built out. There is some land along Century there, south of Safeway, where you may see some more development that, as a result of the university being in there to help service, some of the student population demand. You may see some of the buildings along Chandler kind of repurposed and help better serve the student population that's there. I'm sure Cascade Lakes will benefit greatly from the university going in there. But for the most part, it again comes down to the cost of land, the limited supply, and can you make the project pencil. I think developers are much more sophisticated in terms of, they're not going to move forward with just a speculative development unless there's some science behind it and if they feel they can make the project be successful. I think before the bust, we saw a lot of people that kind of jumped in and wanted to be a developer or wanted to be a lot of different things, and they just didn't have that experience or sophistication in a lot of those projects failed. So it needs to make sense from a dollars and cents standpoint, but you will over time see some growth.
I think on the residential side, what you're going to see is there's going to be an increase in traffic, which will be frustrating for homeowners there, but values are going to go up. The other thing that you'll be seeing is with the city and the accessory dwelling units, I think part of the rental need is you're going to see more and more of those getting built, or bunkhouses getting converted to an accessory dwelling unit where people can lease out space, or even whole homes being turned into off-campus dormitories. Those are some of the things that I've seen in college towns, and that's what I expect to see on the west side of Bend.
I know there's a lot of concern from some of the West Bend residents, and OSU, the city, COCC, we've all begun some initial conversations about what's called a town gown committee. So you have the city, the community, and the universities talking about different issues. And there's also talk of perhaps a university district kind of just beyond the property that's owned by OSU, and what types of uses would we encourage there so you could capture some of that housing demand, and perhaps have a bit of a transition zone. But with the coming university, the town gown relationship is really important so that you have relationships set. There's trust amongst the different institutions in the community, and you're not just reacting to incidents. You're having these conversations about, boy, we're really starting to see a flood of kids moving into this street. We're seeing couches on the front yard, and kegs and this and that. And everybody goes straight to that I guess the impactful nature of it. But there are ways that you can plan this as a community so that you're you're setting the expectation with the students as to what they're expected to do as residents of the community. You're working with property owners so that they can anticipate changes, and then you have the administration of the different organizations working together to kind of control the concern that people have of having gobs of college students moving in next door to them. And so this university district concept is pretty interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how it progresses and what types of uses we're shooting for.
Other questions? Oh, we got one more in the back.
One in the back.
Shout it out.
Yeah, I was just see if there's any discussion at the city level as far as accommodating tiny home type communities that somebody can have affordable housing without necessarily living in a home.
Question was for tiny homes, perhaps something the city's looking into.
Thanks, Simon. So the tiny homes phenomenon is, I think it's pretty cool. It's a reaction to growing home prices and those types of things. What we're faced with at the city level and across Oregon is just kind of a structural problem with how to permit these particular new uses. If you were to build an RV, that would be reviewed and approved by the Department of Motor Vehicles. If you were to build a home, stick-built home with a foundation, that's reviewed by your local building official. It happens to be Joe McClay in our case. Joe and DMV, and this is at the state level as well, at the state building codes level, they don't know how to reconcile a home that's built on a chassis. That's the problem. And so no one is willing to, Joe doesn't have the ability to approve anything on a chassis. DMV doesn't have the ability to approve anything that doesn't meet their RV standards, which these things don't. So we're kind of caught in a situation where the market has outpaced regulation, which isn't the worst place to be, but it does require us to figure out how to work that through. In terms of where we'd see them in Bend and how that would work, we do have a cluster cottage housing development standard where you're doing smaller homes on smaller acreages, shared amenities, common space, these types of things. Could a tiny home be ripe for that type of development? In my mind, it could. It's just a matter of how do you get through that regulatory maze where nobody has the authority to approve these things. And that doesn't even cover what happens when these things start moving in and out. Is this just more like a manufactured home park? Are we going to have design requirements that all these things have a similar look? Or can you have a hodgepodge of different colored and different looking structures? So I mean, there's just the structural issue of how the heck do you permit them, and then there's the design and aesthetic values that with the current planning commission and the current council, I think that would be a really involved, in-depth discussion.
Just a quick point, John. I'm working with a developer right now who's actually executing a project like this in Gresham. So it would be interesting to get his take how that.
On the Hayden Homes front, we've been looking at tiny houses for a few years now. We piloted a project in Walla Walla where we have combinations of 400, 600, 800, and 1,000-foot single detached homes, garageless homes on a single tax lot. And we're getting densities to 18 units to the acre, but for the resident, it's not like living in a common wall apartment. You actually have your own home and you have your own space, and because they're detached, it creates a lot of opportunity for common area. We're doing something similar to this in Bend right now, but it's in a traditional single-family and a duplex community that we're building this concept, but it would be on individual tax lots. But we're going to have 35 homes available for rent here coming up late summer, and the project's fully underway.
What are your price points for that?
Price points on the sale?
Bulk.
Or the bulk sale? Yeah, I think it all depends on it's not open to the market right now. So it's a pilot project. We're doing it internally, and then we're going to lease it out and see how it works here in Bend. We've got a fully developed concept in Walla Walla, and so there's no price available at this point.
Great.
Any more questions? One more.
Is the city looking at RL zone where there is room for tiny projects? Is that it's been kind of contentious in the past to break those lots up. Is there any shift in what the thought is with the RL zone, making it a little bit more compact than it is today?
So did you ask specifically about the RL zone? Did I hear you say that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the RL zone, for those folks who might not know, it's kind of a remnant zoning district that I think you could have up to maybe acre and a half size lots, not necessarily consistent with Oregon's kind of direction to densify with the UGBs. So is there capacity on some of these RL lots to see redevelopment, infill, and those types of items? Yes. I haven't studied the map recently enough to know exactly which RL areas might be ripe for a different type of entitlement that would allow for more dense development, but it is that type of thinking that that's the entitlement supply that we have within the UGB, where we're looking at these underdeveloped areas and seeing if there's potential for enhanced density. And then if we can figure out the tiny homes and they fit on there, great. If it's just more of a cottage style that Steve was mentioning, that's potential as well.
Okay, well, I think it's about time to wrap up. Can I have everyone give our panelists and David a round of applause? One more time, we want to thank our platinum sponsors, Schwab Williamson of Wyatt. We want to thank all of our rose sponsors, and of course, we want to thank you all for being here. And again, thank you for having us, and thank you, panel.